Null, a Minecraft creature of pure terrors. It has been around in the Minecraft universe long before the first Minecraft players ever existed. But now he's on a mission to hunt all of these players down. How did this terrifying creature come into existence, and why does it want you so badly? Find out as we explore the story of the Null. Our story begins eons ago, long before the first Minecraft player ever existed, before even the ancient civilization of the overworld existed, as it begins in a dimension far away, billions of years ago. This dimension was once a very peaceful place, filled with life of all different varieties, and many beautiful landscapes. Well, that's how it used to be, as that all changed on one winter night, as the great spirits that were meant to protect their world and keep life thriving on it had been corrupted, and now they wanted destruction and power. And so, in a matter of seconds, these spirits consumed the world, warping it from a lively dimension with millions of inhabitants to an empty wasteland. And now that spirit with the power of that entire dimension became the most powerful being in the entire Minecraft universe. Something needed to be done to stop it, and quickly, or else this being would start to go to other dimensions, and they too would become a victim of its destruction. And that's when the Null arrives. You see, back when the great ancestral spirits were creating the dimensions in Minecraft, they knew that most of the spirits would do good, and would actually follow through with their duties of protecting their worlds. But they also knew that a few may turn their backs on the spirits and their worlds that they were meant to protect, and try and take the world's powers for themselves. And so, to reduce the threat level of any being that was actually able to do that, they created a self-destruction switch for all worlds. And that switch, when activated, would cause an empty expanse of nothingness to rise and consume that dimension and any remaining life. Now, that may sound devastating, but do keep in mind that this would only happen once an entity or spirit had already gotten to a point of no return in their attempt at consuming all the powers of that world, and this expanse would just stop them from continuing and hurting other worlds. Also, this expanse of nothingness was so powerful that even the great spirits would be killed by it. As for this nothingness's name, well, it was known by many as the Void, and it was placed in every single dimension by the spirits hidden deep underground, waiting to be activated. So now, in the very rare case that a spirit corrupts and tries to take the powers of their world for themselves, the Void is activated and it consumes that greedy spirit. And so that's just what happened to that spirit on that world billions of years ago. That world was consumed by the Void, and the universe was saved from another power-hungry god. So, fast forward a few billion years. At this point, the Void has been able to stop the growth of hundreds of these power-hungry spirits, and save the Minecraft universe many times. But it was then that it was starting to realise a pattern, and that was that all of these spirits that would go on to corrupt and want to take control of their worlds all had one thing in common. And that is that they'd all had an interaction with a player-like being just before they'd been corrupted. So, the Void, which had been created to fix this godly problem of greed, came to the conclusion that all of these players that have the potential to see spirits must be taken away. So that way, the spirits would never corrupt, and thus the Void would never have to rise, causing the end of another innocent dimension. But if the Void wanted to remove players, it was going to need a physical formation in order to do so. That's because it couldn't just rise to the surface, which would kill off the player, because that would also in effect kill off everything else. So instead, the Void created its formation, which was very reminiscent of a player. But this formation was pure black, just like the Void itself. And just like the Void, this formation was freezing cold. And so this brand new freezing being was sent out on a mission by the Void. A mission of hunting down every single player that presented even the slightest of threat of encountering a spirit. And as this formation would go through hunting down these players, all from a distance, many times it would never actually have to act, as the players would remain not a threat, and so it would move on to the next players. However, sometimes, whilst observing from a distance, the being would see that these players become a threat, and so it would attack, removing that player from its world. But while it would do that, Occasionally, a villager or some entity equivalent from another world would watch this thing attack their beloved players and take it away, never for them to be seen again. And so stories and legends began to spread about that thing that took these players away, and that thing was very feared amongst every creature of every world. No one liked this thing, but soon they did give it a name, and that name was the Null. Millions of years pass, and the legend of the Null continues to grow and haunt players forever, until one day you arrive in the overworld. And you, oblivious to the terrifying legends of the Null, continue with your normal activities, from exploring the deepest caverns, to climbing the tallest mountains, to farming endless wheat. Whatever you wanted to do, you did without any fear of the Null. But little did you know that the Null has always been watching you, and you should have been afraid. But luckily he would continue watching most of you indefinitely, never acting. But not all of you are so lucky, as some of you will do something that the Null deems as high risk for you giving up your powers to the spirits, which could result in a dimensional destruction if that spirit chooses to take those powers, the exact thing that it was made to stop. And so at that moment he reveals himself to you, and he starts to you are frozen. You are still frozen. However, you suddenly thaw out, and you, the Steve, are awoken in a dark dungeon in an unknown dimension. The only lights there were very dim redstone torches, so Steve gets out a torch and drops it down. And what he sees is shocking. Thousands, if not tens of thousands, of these player beings all frozen in place within this dungeon, all probably victims of the Null from other universes. He spends a while looking in awe and confusion at these players, wondering why they're all here. He didn't know yet. He hadn't heard of the legends. And so Steve walks ahead, looking for answers and a way to help all these victims. But eventually, he reaches a dead end, and there's a sign. Help me, the Null is near. Steve is really happy to see that sign, because it means someone else has thawed out, even if they were in danger. But as he turns his head, he sees it. A skeleton, still holding the ink used to write that sign. His happiness turns into sadness. He is all alone. Or so he thought, as the Null had just brought back another victim from another universe when he saw the melted ice of the Steve's cage. Immediately, the Null went running down the corridor looking for the Steve, and he sees him looking down at the sign. He goes in for an attack. Steve sees that at the very last second and tries to run away, but it's too late. The Null attacks and everything goes black. Steve opens his eyes again. He is now floating on a bedrock in the middle of the sky, alone and vulnerable. He has no way to get down without falling to his death. But before he can think what to do, he comes face to face with the Null again. He goes to draw his sword, ready to attack and avenge all the victims. But before he can, the Null speaks.
You are the bait for the universe's most deadly threat.
And then the Null destroys that bedrock. Now, as the Steve is falling, you may be wondering, why did the Null set you up to catch some other being? And well, to understand the true threat of that being and why the Null wanted it, you'll need to watch this video.